The police report called it justified force, but the shaky cell phone video told another truth. Elijah Cross, a 73-year-old pastor, lying broken on the pavement for having the audacity to intervene when officers harassed a frightened teenager. What the officers couldn't have known was whose father they had beaten that night. For 8 years, Cameron Cross had disappeared into the remote wilderness, burying the special operations soldier he once was beneath silence and isolation. But one voicemail would shatter that carefully constructed peace. "Your father's in the hospital. They almost killed him." Now, as Elijah fights for his life, his estranged son returns to a neighborhood being systematically erased by powerful men who never expected their perfectly orchestrated scheme would face the one thing they couldn't: intimidate or buy, a son with nothing left to lose and the very skills to bring their empire crumbling down. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The fluorescent lights of Walker's Corner Store buzzed overhead as Elijah Cross placed his items on the counter. It was nearly midnight, but his eyes were bright with purpose despite the late hour. The small pile included toothpaste, soap, several packets of hand warmers, and enough sandwiches to feed at least 10 people. "Mr. Cross, these midnight runs are gonna be the death of you," said Maggie, the cashier, scanning each item with practiced efficiency. Her voice carried the familiar warmth reserved for regular customers. Elijah chuckled, the corners of his eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. At 73, his face was a roadmap of life's journeys, lined but dignified, weathered but kind. "I'm too old for these midnight runs, Maggie, but the shelter doesn't get many visitors this late." He counted out exact change from a worn leather wallet. "Some folks only come out when they think no one's watching." Maggie nodded, understanding in her eyes. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Elijah's routine: former pastor, current community pillar, midnight angel to those who needed it most. For 20 years, he'd been making these late-night deliveries to the homeless shelter 6 blocks away. Take care walking back, Mr. Cross. Things aren't what they used to be around here." Elijah waved away her concern. "The Lord walks with me, Maggie. Always has." The night air had a bite to it as Elijah made his way down Gibson Street. Plastic bags, hanging from each hand, streetlights cast long shadows across cracked sidewalks. Some buildings stood proud and restored, fresh paint and new windows, while others remained boarded up, awaiting their turn in the neighborhood's uneven renaissance. As he turned onto Maple Avenue, voices echoed from an alley ahead. Elijah slowed his pace, squinting to make out the scene. 2 men in plain clothes had cornered a teenager against a brick wall. Even from a distance, Elijah could see the boy's hands trembling, his eyes wide with fear. "I swear I don't have anything. Please just let me go home," the boy pleaded, his voice cracking with adolescent terror. One of the men pressed closer. "Then why'd you run? Nobody runs unless they're hiding something." Elijah hesitated only a moment before setting his bags down by a lamppost. Some instincts ran deeper than caution. He'd spent his life stepping into difficult situations. This was no different. "Evening, gentlemen," Elijah called, approaching with deliberate calm. "Everything all right over here?" The 2 men turned sharply, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with a shaved head. Neither looked pleased at the interruption. "Police business," said the taller one, flashing a badge too quickly for Elijah to read. "Move along." Elijah maintained his measured pace, hands visible at his sides. "I was just concerned about the young man. He seems frightened." The teenager, no more than 16, wearing an oversized hoodie and jeans, looked at Elijah with desperate relief. "Sir, please," the shaved-headed officer cut in, "this doesn't concern you. My name is Elijah Cross. I run the community center over on Washington. Maybe I could help mediate whatever's happening here." He turned to the boy. "Son, are you all right?" Before the teen could answer, the taller officer stepped between them. "You're interfering with police business, old man. Last warning." "I'm just trying to ensure everyone's safe," Elijah said, his voice steady. "The boy doesn't appear to be armed or dangerous." "He matches a description," the shorter officer snapped. Now back off before you're obstructing justice. Elijah stood, his ground, hands still open at his sides. I'd like to see some identification, please, and I'd like to know what this young man is suspected of. The air changed. Something dangerous flickered across both officers' faces. Run, Elijah whispered, to the teen. The boy bolted, fear propelling him down the street faster than either officer could react. The taller one swore loudly, turning his fury toward Elijah. You just helped a suspect escape. He's a child who was scared, Elijah countered calmly. If you have legitimate... The first blow caught Elijah by surprise. An open palm against his chest, sending him stumbling backward. Before he could regain his balance, the shorter officer grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back with unnecessary force. You're under arrest for obstruction, the officer growled, forcing Elijah to his knees. Please, there's no need for... Elijah's words were cut short by a punch to his ribs. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate. Shut up. You should have walked away when you had the chance. What followed was brutal and efficient. Blows rained down, calculated to hurt without leaving obvious marks, except where they didn't care. Elijah tried to protect himself, but his 73-year-old body was no match for their trained violence. He heard something crack in his chest, tasted blood. Through swelling eyes, Elijah saw a figure watching from the shadows, a homeless man with a phone partially raised, recording. Their eyes met briefly before darkness edged Elijah's vision. Enough, the taller officer finally said. Get him out of sight. They dragged him deeper into the alley, his heels scraping concrete, and dumped him behind a dumpster like discarded waste. The last thing Elijah heard before consciousness slipped away was one officer saying to the other, Nobody's gonna miss another old black man. Morning light filtered through the windows of Riverside Hospital's intensive care unit. Elijah lay, unconscious, machines beeping steadily beside him. His face was nearly unrecognizable, swollen, bruised, with a split running through his bottom lip. A tube helped him breathe, and bandages wrapped his chest where 3 ribs had fractured. In the hospital waiting room, a small television mounted in the corner played the local morning news. An elderly man was hospitalized last night after a confrontation with police officers in the Gibson neighborhood, the anchor reported with practiced neutrality. Video emerged showing part of the incident, where officers appear to be defending themselves from an aggressive man who interfered with an arrest. The footage played, grainy and shaking, starting only after Elijah had been forced to the ground. The context missing, the beginning absent. Without the lead-up, it looked like officers restraining someone who wouldn't stay down. The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, the anchor continued. The police union has issued a statement defending the officers' actions as necessary force against an individual who allegedly helped a suspect escape custody. 500 miles away, in a remote cabin nestled among pine trees, Cameron Cross sat cleaning a hunting rifle with methodical precision. At 35, his body was a weapon honed by military service. Lean muscle, precise movements, and eyes that revealed nothing. The cabin's interior was Spartan, no photographs on the walls, minimal furniture, nothing personal except a trunk in the corner. His phone sat on the table, ignored. 15 missed calls in the past month. Cameron never answered. After 8 years in Special Operations Forces, the silence of the mountains had become his only peace. When the phone buzzed again, he nearly ignored it. But something, instinct, perhaps, made him check the screen. Unknown number. Cameron let it go to voicemail. A minute later, curiosity won. He pressed play. My name is Thomas Washington. You don't know me, but I know your father. The voice was deep, urgent. Your father's in the hospital. They almost killed him. Riverside Hospital, room 307. He might not make it this time. Cameron's hand tightened around the phone. 8 years of practice detachment cracked, just slightly. He crossed to the trunk in the corner, opening it for the first time in years. Inside lay a stack of unopened envelopes, all addressed, in the same careful handwriting. Beneath them, a photograph. A younger Elijah with his arm around a teenage Cameron, both smiling. A lifetime ago. Cameron pulled out the photo and one letter, still sealed. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he reached for his duffel bag. 24 hours later, Cameron walked through the doors of Riverside Hospital. He wore jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, his military bearing impossible to disguise despite civilian clothes. His face betrayed nothing, no fear, no anger, no grief. Just assessment. As he approached the nurse's station, an elderly woman watering plants in the hallway dropped her watering can. Water pooled at her feet as she stared. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "Cameron Cross." He nodded once, barely acknowledging her. "We didn't think you'd ever come back," she continued, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Not after what happened with your mother." Cameron's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Room 307, was all he said before walking past. The ICU was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Cameron paused in the doorway of room 307, his stoic expression finally faltering. The man in the bed barely resembled the father he remembered. Elijah's face was a landscape of bruises in various shades of purple and yellow. His breathing was shallow despite the oxygen tube. Cameron moved to the bedside chair with military precision. He sat rigidly, hands clenched into fists on his knees. For a long moment, he simply watched the rise and fall of his father's chest. "I never got to say I was sorry," he finally whispered, voice rough from disuse. "He wouldn't want your sorry," came a woman's voice from the doorway. "He'd just want you here." Cameron turned to see a young nurse standing there, dark hair pulled back into a practical bun. Her name tag read, Amira. "Are you his doctor?" Cameron asked. "Just his nurse. But I know your father well. He runs a literacy program at the community center where my little brother goes." She hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "The official story is wrong." Cameron's eyes narrowed slightly. "What happened? Your father was protecting someone, a teenager who was being harassed by those cops." She reached into her scrubs pocket and pulled out a USB drive. "My cousin sees everything from his spot near the liquor store. He caught most of what happened." Cameron took the drive, his fingers closing around it. "Your dad was protecting someone again," Amira said softly. "He's still a hero, even if no one sees it." After she left, Cameron remained motionless beside the bed. The weight of the USB drive felt like a burning coal in his palm. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly as Cameron walked the streets of his childhood neighborhood. 8 years had changed things. Once familiar corner stores now sported artisanal coffee signs. Abandoned lots had transformed into modern apartment buildings with luxury living banners. Yet pockets remained untouched by this selective renaissance. Blocks where poverty still pressed against every surface. Elijah's neighborhood sat at the crossroads of these two worlds. Cameron noted which buildings were boarded up, which had scaffolding suggesting imminent renovation. The pattern wasn't random. "Well, I'll be damned. The prodigal son returns." Cameron turned to see a man approaching. Early 30s, clean-cut but with faded tattoos visible at his neckline. Something familiar in the stance. "Aaron?" Cameron asked, recognition dawning. In the flesh, Aaron's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't think you'd remember me. Been a minute. You look different." "Yeah, well, the old man saved me. Got me into rehab. Helped me get custody of my kid back." Aaron studied Cameron's face. "You disappeared." There was no accusation in the words, just fact. Cameron didn't deny it. "How is he?" Aaron asked. "Unconscious. Beaten badly." Aaron shook his head slowly. "Not right what they did. Not right at all." He looked up and down the street before continuing. "That boy he was helping? Marcus. Good kid. Works at the grocery on weekends." "I need to find him," Cameron said. "He's scared. Cops told him they'd come for his family if he talked." Aaron paused. "But he's working today. Pierce's Market on Westfield." Cameron gave a single nod of thanks. "Your father never gave up on any of us," Aaron called after him. "Not even you." Pierce's Market was mostly empty when Cameron walked in. Behind the register, A lanky teenager with nervous eyes scanned items for an elderly woman. Cameron waited, browsing canned goods until the store emptied. The boy's hands trembled as he straightened items by the register. "Marcus?" Cameron approached slowly, hands visible. The teenager froze, eyes darting toward the exit. "I'm not here to hurt you," Cameron said quietly. "I'm Elijah Cross's son." Recognition and relief flooded the boy's face, followed immediately by shame. "I ran," he whispered. "I ran and left him there." "He told you to run," Cameron corrected. "Those cops, they just started checking me for no reason. I was walking home from my cousin's place." Marcus's voice shook. "They didn't ask questions. They just attacked. Your dad stepped in and told me, 'Run, son, don't look back.' So I did." Cameron's expression remained neutral, but something fierce burned behind his eyes. "You did what he asked. That's all." "Is he—" Marcus couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," Cameron assured him. "Did you know those officers? Had you seen them before?" Marcus shook his head. "No, but they knew my name somehow. Called me by it before I even said anything. That's what was weird." As Cameron walked back toward the hospital, his phone rang, a number he recognized this time. He answered wordlessly. "I heard you're back." A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Naomi. 8 years of silence, and now you show up looking. For what exactly?" His sister's tone was sharp enough to cut glass. "Absolution?" "I'm here for the old man," Cameron said simply. "Really? Because you weren't here when Mom died. You weren't here when Dad got foreclosure notices. You weren't here for any of it." Cameron said nothing. "I'll be there in an hour. Don't disappear again before I arrive." She hung up. Riverside Hospital's cafeteria was nearly empty when Naomi Cross walked in. At 32, she moved with purpose. Tailored suit, briefcase in hand, eyes scanning the room until they landed on her brother. She'd always looked more like their mother, same determined chin, same analytical gaze. "You look well," Cameron offered as she sat across from him. "Save it." Naomi placed her phone on the table, screen up in case of important calls. "What's your plan?" "I don't have one yet." "Typical." She leaned forward. "While you've been playing Mountain Man, I've been trying to hold what's left of this family together." Dad refused to leave that church even when the neighborhood started changing. Said his people needed him. "Our people," Cameron corrected quietly. "Don't." Naomi's eyes flashed. "You don't get to claim that now, not after walking away. I had reasons. We all have reasons, Cameron. We just don't all have the luxury of disappearing because of them." She pulled out a legal pad. 2 officers are on administrative leave, James Griggs and Peter Holt. Both have complaints in their files, all mysteriously dismissed. I'm building a case. "Have you been to the precinct?" "Of course I have." "They stonewalled me," said Dad was combative and interfered with official police business. Her pen tapped against the paper. "I need that video your nurse friend mentioned." Cameron hesitated. "I haven't watched it yet." "Well, what are you waiting for? Christmas?" Naomi shook her head in frustration. "This is what I do, Cameron. I'm a civil rights attorney. Let me help." "Before." Cameron could respond. His phone lit up with an unknown number. He answered, listened briefly, then stood. "I need to go to the precinct," he said. "I just told you. They won't help. I'm not looking for help." Something cold had entered his voice. "I'm gathering intelligence." The 5th Precinct was housed in a brick building that had once been the neighborhood's pride. Now it stood as a fortress among increasingly gentrified surroundings. Cameron entered alone, Naomi waiting reluctantly in her car outside. At the front desk, Cameron adopted a different posture, less military, more uncertain civilian. "I'm here about my father, Elijah Cross. I was told I could get a copy of the incident report." The desk sergeant barely looked up. "Incident reports take 5 to 7 business days to process. Fill out this form." "Officer, my father is in intensive care. I just need to understand what happened." Should have thought about that before he interfered with an arrest. The sergeant pushed a clipboard toward him. "Fill it out or leave." As Cameron took the clipboard, a door opened behind the desk. Two officers walked through, one of them pausing when he saw Cameron. "You the Cross kid?" The officer was stocky, with closely cropped hair and hard eyes. His nameplate read, Griggs. Cameron met his gaze evenly. "I'm Elijah Cross's son, yes," Officer Griggs smirked. "Word of advice? Old man should have stayed in bed where he belongs." The clipboard bent slightly in Cameron's grip, the only outward sign of the rage flowing beneath his calm exterior. "Thank you for the suggestion," he said evenly. As Griggs walked away laughing, Cameron committed every detail of his face to memory. That night, Cameron slept in his father's modest home for the first time in 8 years. The house was exactly as he remembered. Worn furniture, walls lined with books, and photographs everywhere. Photographs Cameron had avoided looking at for nearly a decade. In sleep, the control Cameron maintained crumbled. His dreams filled with fragments of memories, gunfire, a child's scream, the weight of his rifle. He woke gasping, sheets twisted around him, sweat soaking his skin despite the cool room. For a moment, he didn't recognize where he was. Then reality returned, his father's house, his childhood bedroom. The weight of presence and absence equally heavy. Morning brought Amira to his door, her face tight with worry. "I shouldn't be here," she said as Cameron let her in. "But there's something you need to know." She sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped tightly. "My uncle is Tom Griggs, Officer Griggs's brother." Cameron's expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened. "I think he's done things like this before," Amira continued. "Family dinners, he and James would joke about cleaning up the neighborhood. I thought they meant actual crime, but now..." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Your father gave this to my uncle at church 3 weeks ago. I found it in Tom's desk when I was looking for stamps." The envelope contained names and phone numbers, nothing else. No explanation. "I don't know what it means," Amira admitted. "But the night before your father was attacked, my uncle and Officer Griggs had a huge argument about that stubborn old preacher." After Amira left, Cameron began a systematic search of the house. In his father's study, behind books on theology and civil rights, he found what he was looking for, an old leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with Elijah's distinctive handwriting, prayers, addresses, and coded references that made little sense at first glance. Jackson family, offered $50,000, refused Thompson residence, second offer after incident. Accepted church land, final offer rejected. Pressure increasing, Cameron flipped through pages of similar entries, each more concerning than the last. A pattern was emerging, one that went beyond a simple case of police brutality. As he studied the journal, a knock at the door interrupted his concentration. He opened it to find an elderly man in clerical collar standing on the porch. "Pastor Wilson." Cameron recognized his father's oldest friend. "You look like him," the old man said, voice thick with emotion. "Same eyes, same way of standing." Cameron stepped back, inviting him in. Once seated, Pastor Wilson got straight to the point. "Your father stood in the way of money. That's what this is really about." His gnarled hands trembled slightly. "They've been buying up properties all around the church for 2 years. Elijah refused to sell the community center land." "Who's they?" "Development company. Urban Rise or Urban Vista, something like that." Pastor Wilson leaned forward. After each refusal, something would happen. Break-ins, code violations, police harassment. And no one did anything? Who would we tell? The same authorities carrying out the pressure? Pastor Wilson shook his head sadly. "Your father documented everything, but he was just one old man against a system." As the pastor stood to leave, he placed a heavy hand on Cameron's shoulder. "Don't look deeper, son, or you'll be next." That afternoon, Cameron walked through the neighborhood again, this time paying closer attention to which buildings were being renovated and which remained untouched. Several people recognized him. Some nodded respectfully, others turned away. The prodigal son's return was already neighborhood news. Outside the community center, an older woman sweeping the sidewalk paused her work. "You got some nerve showing. Up now," she said, not unkindly. "Your daddy needed you." "I know," Cameron acknowledged simply. He never said a bad word about you. Not once. She resumed sweeping, even when everyone else did. By evening, Cameron had returned to Elijah's study with renewed purpose. He spread out the journal, the list of names and numbers from Amira, and city permit records he'd accessed online. Names began to connect. Properties changed hands. Police incident reports clustered around specific blocks before property sales. The developers always had different names, but the pattern was unmistakable. And at the center of it all, a company called Urban Vista Holdings. Cameron reached for his phone and called Naomi. "I need everything you can find on Urban Vista Holdings," he said when she answered. "I think I know why Dad was attacked." "Why?" Naomi asked. "Because he was in the way, and someone decided to move him." Dawn broke over the city as Cameron sat in his father's study, surrounded by papers and an open laptop. He hadn't slept. The wall before him had transformed overnight, sticky. Notes, printouts, and handwritten notes connected by red string formed a complex web of information. At the center, Urban Vista Holdings. 3 hours of research had revealed that Urban Vista Holdings was merely the visible tip of a corporate iceberg. The company was owned by Westland Development Group, which itself was owned by a private equity firm called Sentinel Capital Partners. And controlling a majority stake in Sentinel was Colin Vance, former defense contractor, current real estate mogul. The name hit Cameron like a physical blow. Colin Vance, his former commanding officer. Cameron's phone buzzed with a text from Naomi. "Meeting with witnesses at 10, hospital at 2, don't be late." Before meeting his sister, Cameron had one stop to make. He found Officer Griggs at a diner 4 blocks from the precinct, a predictable routine for a man who valued his breakfast. Cameron slid into the booth across from him without invitation. Griggs looked up from his eggs, surprise quickly masked by contempt. "Well, if it isn't the hero's son. Got a death wish?" "Just some questions," Cameron replied, voice neutral despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. "I got nothing to say to you." Griggs took a deliberate bite of toast. Urban Vista Holdings. Colin Vance. The pattern of police incidents before property acquisitions. Cameron kept his voice low. "I know there's a connection." A flicker of unease crossed Griggs's face before his expression hardened again. "You're in over your head, soldier boy. This isn't the sandbox where you get to play hero. My father is in intensive care because of you." Griggs leaned forward, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Your father was in the way. We're doing the city a favor, cleaning it up." His eyes narrowed. "Did 4 tours in Iraq before joining the force. I know your type. Think you're special because you wore a fancy uniform? You're just another guy who couldn't hack it in the real world." Cameron remained perfectly still, his control absolute. "If my father dies, there won't be enough distance on this earth to save you." Griggs smirked. "Is that a threat?" "No." Cameron stood smoothly. "It's intelligence." At the hospital, Cameron found Naomi already in their father's room. The sight stopped him at the threshold. Elijah was awake, eyes open though clouded with pain medication. The breathing tube was gone, replaced by a nasal cannula. "Dad?" The word felt foreign on Cameron's lips after so many years. Elijah's eyes found him, recognition dawning slowly. "Cameron," he whispered, voice raspy from the tube. "You came." Before Cameron could respond, a nurse entered to check Elijah's vitals. Naomi pulled Cameron into the hallway. "He woke up an hour ago," she explained. "He's confused, in and out. Doctor says it's the medication and concussion." "Has he said anything about what happened?" "Fragments. Not enough for a statement." Naomi's professional facade cracked slightly. "But he recognized you. That's something." When they returned to the room, Elijah had drifted back to consciousness. His gaze tracked them as they approached the bed. "The boy?" he asked, the words slurring slightly. "He's safe," Cameron assured him. "You told him to run." Relief softened Elijah's battered features. "Good." His hand trembled as he reached for Cameron's. "They wanted..." He paused, struggling for words. "Wanted God out of this place." Cameron leaned closer. Who, Dad? Who wanted you gone? Man in the blue suit. Offered money. Said it was time for progress. Elijah's eyes closed briefly. When I said no, he said, sometimes progress needs a push. Naomi took notes as Elijah spoke, her attorney's mind cataloging potential evidence. Dad, we need to go public with the video, show what really happened. No, Cameron said firmly. Not yet. Are you serious? Naomi's voice rose. We have evidence of police brutality, clear evidence, and they have lawyers, media connections, and the system on their side. Cameron's expression was unyielding. One video showing a partial beating won't bring down what's happening here. We need more. So what's your plan? Shadow ops? Something like that. Elijah's voice interrupted their argument. Listen to each other, he murmured before drifting back to sleep. The siblings fell silent, the rebuke landing squarely despite their father's weakened state. Later that afternoon, Cameron met with Jefferson Taylor, a former city housing inspector, who had agreed to talk after receiving a call from Pastor Wilson. They sat in Jefferson's modest apartment, blinds drawn despite the bright day. I was fired 3 months ago, Jefferson explained, hands fidgeting with a coffee mug. Official reason was budget cuts. Real reason was I wouldn't sign off on code violations that weren't there. For properties Urban Vista wanted to acquire, Jefferson nodded. They'd target a block. Suddenly, we'd get anonymous complaints about buildings. I'd be sent to inspect with very clear instructions on what to find. He pulled out a folder of documents. I kept copies of everything. Reports I refused to falsify. Emails suggesting where to look. This is exactly what we need, Cameron said, relief evident in his voice. Would you be willing to make a statement? Already written it up, Jefferson slid the folder across the table. Just need to get it notarized. They arranged to meet the following morning at Naomi's office. As Cameron stood to leave, Jefferson caught his arm. Your father stood up when no one else would. I'm doing this for him. That night, Cameron received a call from Amira. Her voice was tight with panic. Someone followed me home from the hospital, a black SUV. It circled my block 3 times before parking down the street. Are you alone? Cameron was already grabbing his keys. Yes, my roommate's away for the weekend. Lock your doors, stay away from windows. I'll be there in 15 minutes. When Cameron arrived, he did a thorough sweep of Amira's apartment building. Before coming to her door, she let him in, face pale with fear. Earlier today, a car nearly ran me off the road, she said once they were inside. It swerved toward me at the last second. Could have been an accident, but it wasn't, Cameron finished. He moved methodically through her apartment, checking windows and sightlines. Pack a bag. You're not staying here tonight. While Amira gathered her things, Cameron installed simple security measures, chair wedges, for doors, window alarms from a nearby hardware store. As he worked, he explained his findings about Urban Vista and Colin Vance. They're not just after one property. They're reshaping entire neighborhoods, he said. And they're using police to help clear the way. But why target me? Amira asked, emerging with a small overnight bag. Because you helped us. Because you're connected to both sides through your uncle. Cameron checked his watch. My contact at City Hall gave me access to their server room tonight. I need to drop you somewhere safe first. I'm coming with you, Amira said firmly. I've been accessing medical records for your father. I know my way around secure systems. Cameron assessed her for a long moment before nodding once. Stay close. Do exactly as I say. Under cover of darkness, they slipped into the Department of Urban Development's offices. Cameron's contact, a janitor whose son had been helped by Elijah's youth program, let them in through a service entrance before continuing his rounds. We have 20 minutes before the security sweep, Cameron whispered as they navigated dimly lit hallways to the server room. Inside, Amira kept watch while Cameron connected a device to the main terminal. Years of military intelligence work made the intrusion methodical and swift. Files copied rapidly, emails, development plans, surveillance data. Look at this, Cameron murmured, pointing to a folder labeled Targeted enhancement zones. The maps on screen showed neighborhoods divided into color-coded sections. Red zones, primarily black neighborhoods including Elijah's, were marked for comprehensive redevelopment. They're not just buying properties, Amira realized. They're mapping entire communities for takeover. Cameron scrolled through more files, each more damning than the last. Listen to this. Surveillance protocols for at-risk zones have been implemented. Assets in place. He looked up at Amira. They're talking about police officers. They've turned them into private security for a development company. A sound in the hallway froze them both. Cameron quickly disconnected his device, data secured. They slipped out through an emergency exit, alarm disabled by Cameron's military-grade tech. Safely back in Cameron's car, Amira finally asked the question that had been building. How do you know how to do all this? Cameron's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I was special operations. Intelligence gathering was part of the job. And Colin Vance? The developer behind all this? My former commanding officer, Cameron admitted. He ran psychological operations in conflict zones, creating instability, then controlling the aftermath. His voice hardened. Looks like he brought the war home. The next morning, Cameron received a text from Naomi. Jefferson never showed. Can't reach him. By afternoon, the news confirmed Cameron's worst fears. Jefferson Taylor had been found dead in his apartment. Heart attack, according to the preliminary report. He was 42 and ran marathons, Naomi said when they met at the hospital. There's no way this was natural. It wasn't, Cameron agreed. They're eliminating loose ends. Naomi paced the small waiting room. I've been offered a position with Walker and Associates, prestigious firm, double my current salary. She stopped, facing Cameron. The offer came with a warning to drop any involvement with Dad's case. What are you going to do? What do you think? Naomi's eyes flashed. I told them to shove their blood money, but it means they're worried about what we might find. As they visited Elijah, who remained in and out of consciousness, Cameron shared his discoveries from the server room. The siblings began mapping connections between Urban Vista Holdings, the police department, and City Hall. It's not just a few corrupt cops, Cameron explained. It's systematic. They're using military intelligence tactics in civilian life to reshape communities. Naomi's phone buzzed with a news alert. They're saying Jefferson had a history of heart problems, she read aloud. That's a lie. I have his medical records from the discrimination suit last year. Perfect health. As they left the hospital, Cameron felt the weight of surveillance. A dark sedan that had been in the parking lot earlier now followed at a discreet distance. He guided Naomi along a route that would make pursuit difficult. We need to be careful, he warned. With what happened to Jefferson, they're sending a message. I need to get back to the hospital, Naomi said. I want to pull the security footage from the night Dad was brought in. It might show something. I'll do it, Cameron offered. Less conspicuous. That evening, Cameron returned to Riverside Hospital. Using Amira's ID badge, he slipped into the security office during a shift change. The footage archives were organized by date, but when he selected the night of Elijah's admission, the screen displayed an error message. File not found. Looking for something? A voice came from behind him. Cameron turned to find a security guard watching from the doorway, tall, military-bearing, evident despite the rent-a-cop uniform. Just checking footage from my father's case, Cameron replied evenly. The guard stepped closer. His name tag read, Phillips. Those files have been requisitioned as part of an ongoing investigation, Phillips said. His stance and terminology betrayed military training. Official channels only. As Cameron left, Phillips called after him. You're not the only one with a military past, soldier. The warning was clear. The opponent knew exactly who he was facing. 3 days later, Elijah's condition improved enough for him to speak more clearly. Cameron and Naomi sat at his bedside, as a doctor reviewed his progress. The confusion is diminishing, though he may still have memory gaps, the doctor explained. Physically, he's healing well, but the recovery will be long. Once they were alone, Elijah gripped Cameron's hand with surprising strength. "I remember more now," he said, voice still raspy but determined. "About the attack?" Naomi leaned forward. "Recorder ready." Elijah nodded slowly. "The boy, Marcus." The officers stopped him first. "I saw one of them drop something by the boy's feet, then claimed they'd found it." "A weapon?" Cameron asked. "A small bag. Drugs, maybe." The boy kept saying, "It wasn't his." Elijah closed his eyes briefly, the memory causing visible distress. They were setting him up. That's when I intervened. Cameron and Naomi exchanged glances. This was worse than they'd thought. Not just brutality, but fabricating evidence. "Dad," Naomi said gently, "we need to go public with this. Your testimony could get him killed," Cameron interrupted. "Jefferson Taylor was ready to testify. Now he's dead." Elijah looked between his children, understanding dawning in his eyes. "This is bigger than just me, isn't it?" Neither answered directly, but their silence was confirmation enough. That evening, while Cameron met with contacts who might have information about Colin Vance, Naomi remained at their father's house. In his study, surrounded by decades of his life's work, she found herself drawn to a bookshelf containing family albums. Inside one, she discovered a bundle of envelopes, all addressed to Cameron, all returned unopened. She recognized Elijah's handwriting, the careful script that had filled church bulletins and community flyers for years. Naomi selected one letter at random, dated 3 years earlier, and began to read. "Cameron, your mother asked about you again today. The treatments are taking their toll, but her faith remains strong, as does mine. I believe you will find your way home eventually. Not because you need forgiveness, there is nothing to forgive, but because you need to forgive yourself. The burden you carry was not yours to bear alone. When you're ready, we will be here. With love." Dad tears blurred Naomi's vision as she read letter after letter, each expressing unconditional love and unwavering hope for Cameron's return. No blame, no judgment, just open arms waiting for a prodigal son. When Cameron returned near midnight, he found Naomi still in the study, the letters spread around her. "He never stopped loving you," she said quietly. "Even when the rest of us were angry, he just kept writing these letters, kept your room ready." Cameron stood in the doorway, his carefully constructed walls threatening to crumble. "I didn't deserve his faith." "Maybe that's the point of faith," Naomi replied. "It's not about deserving." The next morning, Cameron drove Amira to her shift at the hospital. They sat in silence until she finally asked the question that had been building between them. "What happened? Why did you leave?" Cameron stared straight ahead, hands tight on the steering wheel. For a moment, Amira thought he wouldn't answer. Then, voice low and controlled, "My last mission. Raid on a suspected weapons cache in a remote village. Intel was wrong. There were no weapons, just families." His expression remained frozen, but something broke in his eyes. "A child ran toward us. I thought he had a grenade. It was a toy." Amira said nothing, simply listening. "I killed him. 7 years old." Cameron's voice cracked for the first time. "When I got home, I couldn't face my father. His whole life was about saving people. Mine became about killing them. Is that why you stayed away when your mother got sick?" Cameron nodded once. "I was in Germany when Naomi called. She told me Mom wanted to see me before the surgery. I said I'd try to make it. But I didn't. I was afraid." "Of what?" "That she'd look at me and see what I'd become. What I'd done." His knuckles were white on the wheel. "She died 3 days later. I never got to say goodbye." "Your father would forgive you," Amira said softly. "That's the problem. He would. I don't deserve it." At the hospital, they found Elijah examining a Bible Naomi had brought him. His fingers traced familiar passages with reverence. "I found something," he told Cameron when they were alone. "More names. Hidden in here." The Bible's margins contained tiny notations, names, dates, and initials, all matching the pattern of police incidents before property sales. I started noticing it 2 years ago, Elijah explained. First, the Wilson family on Elm Street. Police planted drugs, arrested their son. 2 weeks later, they sold their home for half its value. Then the Taylors on Jackson Avenue. Building code violations appeared overnight. The pattern kept repeating. So you started documenting everything, Cameron said, understanding dawning. Elijah nodded. The church wall, behind the painting of Daniel in the lion's den. I hid a ledger there. Every transaction, every bribe I heard about. Names of officers involved. Naomi arrived as they were discussing the ledger. The church is scheduled for a fire inspection tomorrow morning, she informed them. We need to get that ledger now. That afternoon, Cameron approached the old church alone. The brick building stood proud despite the changing neighborhood around it, a Victorian structure with stained glass windows depicting scenes of deliverance and hope. As he slipped inside through a side door, he noted fresh, condemned notices posted at the entrance. The silence inside was heavy with memory. This place had been the center of his childhood, before war and guilt had taken him away. The painting hung where it always had, Daniel surrounded by lions, his face serene in faith. Cameron carefully removed it from the wall, revealing a small hollow space behind. Inside lay a leather-bound book, its pages filled with Elijah's meticulous records, names, dates, amounts, properties, police officers involved, a complete record of corruption spanning 3 years. As Cameron secured the ledger inside his jacket, he heard footsteps at the main entrance. Through a window, he spotted 2 men in fire inspector uniforms, but their demeanor and the bulges beneath their jackets told a different story. Cameron slipped out through the choir loft as they entered the main sanctuary. By the time they realized someone had been there, he was already 3 blocks away. That evening, the Cross siblings met with Aaron at a diner outside the neighborhood. After his transformation from gang member to responsible father, Aaron had maintained connections in both worlds, valuable intelligence in a community under siege. I overheard something about 2 weeks ago, Aaron told them, voice low despite the empty diner. 2 officers talking behind Pierce's Market said they were cleaning out blocks before appraisal season. One of them mentioned your dad specifically, said he was making things difficult by rallying the holdouts. Would you be willing to testify to this? Naomi asked. Aaron hesitated, glancing at the photo of his young son in his wallet. For Mr. Cross? Yeah. He gave me my life back when everyone else wrote me off. He looked directly at Cameron. But I need guarantees. For my boy. We'll protect you, Cameron promised. After Aaron left, the siblings remained in the booth, reviewing everything they'd gathered. The ledger, the server files, witness statements, and the partial video of Elijah's beating. We need more, Cameron insisted. This implicates some officers and shows a pattern, but it doesn't reach high enough. Vance is still insulated. Maybe that's not the point, Naomi countered. Maybe we don't need to bring down the entire system at once. We just need enough pressure to force accountability for what happened to Dad. They fell silent as the waitress refilled their coffee. When she left, Naomi reached across the table and took her brother's hand, the first such gesture since his return. You know what Dad would say, she said softly. He'd say this isn't about vengeance. It's about justice. Something shifted in Cameron's expression, a softening around the eyes, a crack in the armor he'd built after years of war. I'm not sure I know the difference anymore. Then let me remind you, Naomi squeezed his hand. You don't have to be perfect, just don't disappear again. Cameron looked at his sister, really looked at her for the first time since his return. He saw the strength she'd developed in his absence, the determination that mirrored their father's. Won't, he promised. 2 days later, tragedy struck. Aaron was found dead in an alley 3 blocks from his apartment. Official cause, drug overdose. That's impossible, Naomi insisted when Cameron told her the news. He was clean for 4 years. He coached Little League. It wasn't an overdose, Cameron said grimly. I saw the body. There were restraint marks on his wrists, Injection site was wrong for a user. The local news barely covered the story, just another statistic in a neighborhood they'd already written off. When mentioned, Aaron was described as a man with a history of drug problems, despite years of sobriety. They didn't just kill him, Naomi said as they watched the dismissive news report. They erased everything he became, everything he worked for. Cameron stood by the window watching police cars cruise slowly past Elijah's house for the third time that day. His face was carved from stone, but a dangerous fire burned in his eyes. "No more peace talks," he said finally. "It's time to go to war." Naomi rose and stood beside him, her expression equally determined but tempered with their father's wisdom. "No," she corrected. "It's time to make them listen to the truth, with everyone watching." 3 days after Aaron's murder, the alley, where his body was found transformed from a forgotten space between buildings to a sea of candlelight. Hundreds gathered, standing shoulder to shoulder in quiet defiance. Handmade signs reading "Justice for Aaron" and "We Remember" rose above the crowd. Cameron stood at the edge, watching as Naomi took her place beside Aaron's mother and 7-year-old son. Whatever hesitation his sister might have felt about going, public had vanished with Aaron's death. Now she moved with the righteous anger of someone who had nothing left to lose. "We're told that some lives matter less than others." Naomi's voice carried through the crowd without need of amplification. "We're expected to accept when our neighbors are found dead in alleys, when our elders are beaten in streets, when our community is dismantled piece by piece," the crowd murmured in agreement. Aaron Turner was a father, a coach, a man who rebuilt his life after mistakes. The system wants you to remember only his past, not the future that was taken from him. Her voice broke slightly as she looked at Aaron's son. "But we will remember all of him, and we will demand answers." As Naomi spoke, Cameron noticed at least 3 unmarked police cars parked at the perimeter. Officers inside watched through tinted windows, documenting faces in the crowd. Cameron memorized their license plates while keeping his face turned away from their cameras. By morning, "Our Justice for Aaron" was trending locally. Pictures of the vigil appeared on news sites, though most mainstream outlets buried the story beneath more comfortable headlines. "It's not enough," Cameron said as he and Naomi reviewed media coverage from Elijah's kitchen table. "They're treating it as a local human interest story. We need national attention." Naomi nodded, laptop open before her. "Which is why I just sent this to the editor of the Tribune." She turned the screen to show him an op-ed titled, "The Price of Progress: How Development Dollars Buy Police Power." The byline read, "Anonymous." It details everything: the pattern of police harassment before property sales, the targeted neighborhoods, the connections to Urban Vista. Naomi closed the laptop. "Not enough specifics to identify our sources, but enough truth to make them nervous." "When does it run?" "Tomorrow morning, front page of the digital edition." Naomi sipped her coffee. "And I've sent copies to 6 other major outlets. Once one publishes, the others won't want to be left behind." Cameron studied his sister with newfound respect. "Dad would be proud." "He taught me well." Naomi's smile was bittersweet. "Fight the system from within. Use their own tools against them." The op-ed hit like a thunderclap. By noon, it had been shared thousands of times across social platforms. The final line became a rallying cry across the city. "We are not disposable, not anymore." As predicted, competing outlets scrambled to follow up with their own stories. Local reporters who had ignored the pattern began digging into property records, police complaint histories, and development plans. Cameron and Naomi monitored the coverage from Elijah's hospital room. Their father was sitting up now, color returning to his face despite the lingering bruises. "They're calling me," Elijah said, gesturing to the stack of messages Naomi had brought. Reporters, community leaders, former parishioners, all reaching out now that the story was gaining momentum. "You don't have to speak to any of them," Cameron assured him. Elijah shook his head slowly. "All those years preaching about standing for truth, and now I'd hide? No, son. When the moment comes, we must be ready to speak." A nurse interrupted with news that would accelerate their timeline. "There's someone in the lobby asking for you," she told Cameron. "Says his name is Davis. Says he has the full video of what happened to your father." The man waiting in the hospital lobby was rail-thin with weathered skin and wary eyes. He clutched a battered backpack to his chest, like it contained precious cargo. "You're his son?" he asked when Cameron approached. Cameron nodded. "I filmed it. All of it." Davis glanced nervously around the lobby. "Been hiding since. They've been looking for me." "How did you find us?" Naomi asked. "Heard about the vigil. Figured if you were brave enough to do that, I should be brave enough to come forward." He reached into his backpack and pulled out an older model phone. "It's all here. From the beginning. Before they touched him. Shows everything." Cameron took the phone, opened the video file, and pressed play. The footage was shaky but clear enough. Elijah calmly approaching the officers, hands visible. The teen backing away in fear. No aggression from Elijah, only measured words. Then the first officer shoving him, the situation escalating into brutality within seconds. "This changes everything," Naomi whispered. Within hours, Naomi had made a secure copy of the full video and released it through legal channels to select media outlets. By evening, it played on screens across the city, the unedited truth of what had happened to Elijah Cross. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds gathered spontaneously outside the police precinct. More assembled at City Hall. Signs reading "Justice for Elijah" appeared in windows and on street corners. Unlike the sanitized news coverage that had followed the initial incident, this time the story couldn't be contained. The image of a respected elder being brutalized for protecting a teenager cut through political divisions and forced uncomfortable conversations. Cameron monitored the protests from a distance, his military training allowing him to spot potential flashpoints and direct volunteer peacekeepers through secure messages. When police formed lines with riot gear, Cameron ensured protest marshals created buffer zones to prevent confrontation. "We're not here for conflict," he instructed the volunteer team. "We're here to be seen, to be heard. No one gets hurt today." As public pressure mounted, Colin Vance finally emerged from the shadows. His media conglomerate connections flooded. Local airwaves with character assassination pieces. Experts questioning Elijah's mental health. Analysts suggesting the community center had been mismanaged, and talking heads implying that gentrification was merely natural urban evolution. One afternoon broadcast included a leaked medical report claiming Elijah suffered from early-stage dementia, a complete fabrication that nonetheless planted seeds of doubt about his testimony. "They're desperate," Naomi observed as they watched the coverage. "Which means we're getting close." Their progress came with escalating costs. The following morning, Naomi received notice of an ethics complaint filed against her with the State Bar Association. The anonymous complaint accused her of leaking confidential legal materials and witness tampering. "This is absurd," she fumed, reading the formal letter. "They've suspended my license pending investigation. Every case I'm working on is now in limbo." "They're isolating us," Cameron said, "cutting off your professional resources, testing our resolve." That evening, a message appeared in Cameron's encrypted email, an address he'd used only for military communications years ago. The sender identified only as Scope. "I have access to Urban Vista's encrypted server backups, full documentation of their operations, payment records, communications with city officials and law enforcement. Everything you need to blow this wide open. But I have one condition. Burn them all publicly. No deals, no settlements, complete exposure. If interested, reply with the coordinates of your father's church. I'll find you." Cameron traced the message through multiple proxies, but the sender remained hidden behind sophisticated security measures few civilians could manage. When he showed Naomi, her legal mind immediately raised concerns. "Could be legitimate. Could also be a trap to catch us doing something illegal," she warned. "Only one way to find out," Cameron replied, typing the church coordinates. The response came within minutes. "Tomorrow, midnight, the Westview Tower, service. Entrance, come alone. Bring tools for digital extraction." Westview Tower stood 40 stories above the financial district, one of Urban Vista's most prestigious properties. Its gleaming glass exterior housed tech startups, corporate law firms, and the private apartments of the city's elite. Cameron spent the day surveilling the building, mapping security patrols and camera placement. At precisely midnight, he approached the service entrance wearing a maintenance uniform borrowed from a supporter. A janitorial cart provided cover for his equipment. Inside, he found the service elevator held open by a young woman with sharp eyes and purple-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. "You're late, Cross," she said, though he was precisely on time. "Scope?" She nodded once. 14 minutes until the security patrol circles back. We need to move." They descended to a sub-basement level unmarked on public building plans. Behind, a maintenance room's false wall lay a server room humming with advanced equipment. "Urban Vista's shadow network," Scope explained as she bypassed security protocols with practiced ease. "They keep the sensitive operations off the main corporate systems. Parallel infrastructure for their less-than-legal activities." "How did you find this?" Cameron asked, connecting his extraction equipment. "I designed it." Scope's fingers flew across a keyboard. "Until I realized what they were using it for. Now, I'm making amends." The files they uncovered revealed a conspiracy, more extensive than even Cameron had imagined. Fake police reports generated to pressure residents, surveillance data on community leaders, and detailed timetables for neighborhood transitions. Most damning were folders containing direct communications between Colin Vance and high-ranking city officials, including specific orders regarding troublesome property holdouts. Elijah's name appeared in multiple exchanges. "The Cross situation requires immediate resolution. The community center property is essential to Phase 3. If he won't accept the final offer, move to alternate measures. The church is already slated for demolition due to structural concerns." CVAs they finished downloading the final files. An alert flashed on Scope's screen. "Security protocol initiated. Someone knows we're here." "How much time?" 2 minutes, maybe less. They cleared their digital footprints and slipped out through a loading dock moments before security swarmed the server room. From a safe distance, Cameron watched as private security vehicles surrounded the building. "They'll check cameras," Scope noted as they separated. "I've looped the basement footage, but be prepared to disappear for a while." The information they'd gathered was incendiary, enough to implicate dozens of officials, officers, and executives. But they still needed a credible insider from law enforcement, willing to confirm the pattern of police involvement. That potential witness appeared unexpectedly the following day. Officer Ray Mendez, a patrol cop who'd been with the department for 15 years, contacted Naomi through a secure channel provided by a mutual acquaintance. "I can't be seen with you," he explained during their clandestine meeting in a church basement across town. "But I've watched this happening for years. Your father was always good to my family. He deserves better than this." Mendez revealed that the corruption extended beyond property deals to include systematic targeting of young men in specific neighborhoods. "It's bigger than even you think," he told them. "They're targeting kids, teenagers mostly, getting them into the system young, creating records that follow them for life. Makes them easier to remove later when they want the properties." "Will you testify to this?" Naomi asked. Mendez hesitated before nodding. "With protection. My family, too. I've documented everything, dates, names, locations. It's all on a drive at my sister's house." They arranged for him to provide a sworn statement to a trusted judge the following morning. Meanwhile, Elijah continued to recover, his strength returning with each passing day. The doctors had cleared him for discharge within the week, though he would need ongoing physical therapy. When Cameron visited him that evening, he found his father sitting in a chair by the window, watching a gathering crowd below. Supporters had maintained a constant vigil outside the hospital, holding signs and singing hymns that floated up to Elijah's fourth-floor room. "They need something to believe in," Elijah said without turning. "More than justice for one old man." "It's about more than you now," Cameron acknowledged. "It's about the whole system." Elijah nodded slowly. "Then we must give them truth. All of it." The following evening, despite his doctor's protests, Elijah insisted on attending a community gathering. In the church courtyard, Cameron and Naomi helped him into a wheelchair, though he refused to remain seated once they arrived. Hundreds had assembled in the space: families, elders, children, community leaders. When Elijah rose shakily to his feet, leaning heavily on a cane, a hush fell over the crowd. For a moment, he simply stood there, his bruised face visible to all. Then, with a voice that carried decades of moral authority, he began to speak. "I may be old," he said, each word measured and clear, "but my God is still bigger than your lies." The crowd erupted in cheers and amens. Phones captured the moment, sending it instantly across social networks. It became the image the media couldn't ignore: an injured elder standing against Goliath, backed by his community. The disciplinary hearing against Naomi was scheduled with unusual haste, a clear attempt to discredit her before she could present their evidence publicly. She arrived at the courthouse flanked by 3 fellow attorneys who had volunteered to represent her pro bono. As the panel prepared to begin the proceedings, a court clerk hurriedly passed a tablet to the head of the Ethics Committee. The woman's expression shifted from officiousness to shock as she scrolled through whatever had appeared on the screen. "This hearing will be postponed indefinitely," she announced abruptly. Later, they learned what had happened. Minutes before the hearing, Scope had leaked a complete transcript of internal city emails proving the ethics complaint had been orchestrated by Bradley Wilson, a senior partner at Naomi's former firm with direct financial ties to Urban Vista. "They're scrambling," Naomi observed as they watched the afternoon news coverage, "making mistakes." One of those mistakes became evident when Officer Griggs, frustrated by his suspension and the mounting public scrutiny, lashed out at a reporter who cornered him outside his home. The footage of him striking the cameraman spread rapidly, becoming another visual confirmation of the temperament they had been fighting against. That evening, as they reviewed their growing evidence at Elijah's home, Naomi finally addressed the weight that had lingered between them for years. "I need to tell you something," she said, setting aside the legal briefs she'd been annotating. "About Mom." Cameron stilled, waiting. "When she was diagnosed, she wanted to wait for you before the surgery. I told her not to." Naomi's voice wavered. "I told her you wouldn't come, that waiting would just put her at risk." The admission hung between them. "I blamed you for leaving," she continued, "but I was scared you wouldn't come back at all, that she'd be heartbroken waiting for someone who never arrived." Cameron absorbed this in silence, his face unreadable. "She waited anyway," Naomi finished. 3 extra days, until the doctor said they couldn't wait any longer." "She was right to wait," Cameron finally said. "I was coming. I was on a flight when she went into surgery." Naomi's eyes widened. "You never said—" "The mission ended early. I was on my way home." His voice was hollow with old grief. "I landed to the news that she was gone." The revelation settled between them. Years of blame and hurt, built on a tragic misalignment of timing and miscommunication. "I'm sorry," Naomi whispered. "Me too." Their reconciliation was interrupted by an encrypted message from one of Cameron's military contacts, a former member of his special ops team now working in private security. "Vance's tactics look awfully familiar. Remember Kabul, the displacement protocols? He's using the playbook here, running domestic psyops against civilians. Thought you should know." Attached was a document showing disturbing parallels between urban counterinsurgency tactics they'd used overseas and the methods being deployed in targeted neighborhoods: surveillance, strategic pressure points, and identification of community leaders for neutralization. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place the next morning, when Naomi and Amira, working together at the hospital, discovered files about relocation protocols that had been misfiled in a city health department database. "They're calling it a youth intervention program," Amira said as they examined the documents. "But look at the locations. The coordinates matched remote properties owned by Vance's subsidiary companies, converted juvenile detention facilities, repurposed as behavioral modification centers. Records showed dozens of teenage boys from targeted neighborhoods had been picked up for minor infractions, then relocated to these facilities on judges' orders. They're removing the next generation of community leaders," Naomi realized, "making sure there's no one left to organize resistance when they make their final push." As they compiled their evidence for public release, Disaster struck. Officer Mendez, their insider prepared to testify, vanished the night before his sworn statement was to be recorded. His family was reportedly moved to a safe house for protection, but the address traced back to a property managed by Urban Vista Security. The message was clear. Even those within the system would be silenced if they spoke out. That evening, Cameron received a private video message from a secured account. When he played it, Colin Vance's face filled the screen, older than Cameron remembered, but with the same calculating eyes that had once commanded military operations. "You're not a soldier anymore, Cross," Vance said, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing strategy over coffee. "You're a liability, and I clean liabilities." Cameron played the video silently for Naomi. His expression hardened with each frame. "What are you thinking?" she asked when it ended. That it's time to become what he fears. Over the next 48 hours, Cameron and Naomi created something Vance couldn't fight with intimidation or character assassination, a public coalition too diverse to discredit. They brought together survivors of police violence, community teachers, honest cops who'd been sidelined, clergy from multiple faiths, small business owners, and even former city officials who'd resigned rather than participate in corruption. They called it the Elijah Initiative, a movement built on exposing systematic abuses while offering a vision for authentic community development. Each participant recorded testimony, provided documentation, or offered expertise that formed pieces of the larger truth. Working from Elijah's living room, now converted into an operations center, they prepared for one final broadcast that would present their case to the world, complete with evidence, names, accounts, videos, and confessions. As Amira set up the technical components and Naomi finalized the legal protections for their sources, Cameron sat beside his father's bed, where Elijah rested between physical therapy sessions. "We go live tomorrow," Cameron told him. "Every major platform simultaneously. Once it's out, there's no going back." Elijah reached for his son's hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite all he'd endured. "All these years," he said softly, "I prayed for you to find purpose again, to heal from what happened overseas." His eyes held Cameron steadily. "This isn't about vengeance, is it?" "No," Cameron answered truthfully. "It's about making them face what they've done, making them see the people they've tried to erase." Elijah nodded, satisfied. "Then this time," he said, "they'll hear your voice too." "We go live in 60 seconds. Amira's voice was steady as she made final adjustments to the broadcasting equipment set up in Elijah's living room. What had begun as a simple live stream had evolved into something far more sophisticated, a multi-platform broadcast secured against interruption through redundant systems and satellite uplinks arranged by scope. Cameron stood behind the main camera, watching Naomi make final adjustments to her notes. She wore a simple blue blazer, her expression composed despite the gravity of what they were about to do. Beside her sat Elijah, in a comfortable chair, dressed in his Sunday best despite it being Wednesday morning. His bruises had faded to yellowed shadows, but the dignity in his posture remained undiminished. 5 seconds, Amira counted down. 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on, and Naomi looked directly into the camera. "My name is Naomi Cross. I'm a civil rights attorney in this city. Beside me is my father, Elijah Cross, who 3 weeks ago was brutally beaten by police officers for protecting a teenager from being falsely arrested." Her voice was clear, measured. "What happened to my father isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a systematic effort to remove certain residents from targeted neighborhoods, a coordinated campaign involving police, city officials, and corporate developers." As she spoke, the broadcast cut to carefully prepared evidence, the unedited video of Elijah's beating, property records showing the pattern of acquisitions after police incidents, and portions of Elijah's ledger documenting the corruption. "Today, we're going to show you exactly how this system works," Naomi continued. "How a development company called Urban Vista Holdings has been using police as private security to clear neighborhoods for profitable redevelopment. How teenagers have been targeted and removed to break community resistance, and how anyone who speaks out is silenced." The broadcast continued with testimony from community members, each sharing their experience of intimidation, false arrests, or pressure to sell their homes below market value. Davis, the homeless man who had filmed Elijah's beating, appeared, with his face obscured to protect his identity. When the testimonials concluded, Cameron stepped in front of the camera. His military bearing was evident, but he spoke with his father's moral clarity. The man behind this operation is Colin Vance, CEO of Sentinel Capital Partners and controlling owner of Urban Vista Holdings. Cameron displayed photographs and documents showing Vance's connections to city officials. Vance is a former defense contractor who has applied military psychological operation tactics to civilian neighborhoods. I know this because I served under his command overseas. The broadcast had been live for 23 minutes when the first disruption occurred. Reports from viewers that some internet providers were experiencing technical difficulties in affected neighborhoods. But Scope's precautions held. The backup systems kicked in, and the stream continued uninterrupted. 37 minutes in, as Elijah began speaking about his community's history of resilience, the power grid in 6 city blocks surrounding their location suddenly failed. Emergency generators hummed to life, and the satellite uplink maintained the broadcast without pause. "They're getting desperate," Amira whispered, monitoring the technical systems. By the 1-hour mark, the live stream had gone viral. Viewer counts climbed into the hundreds of thousands across all platforms. Comments and shares multiplied by the second. News networks began picking up portions of the broadcast, initially with skepticism, but with increasing seriousness as the evidence mounted. As they neared the conclusion, Naomi delivered the final piece of their case. A secure document drop containing the complete evidence package was simultaneously released to journalists, federal authorities, and watchdog organizations nationwide. "This isn't just about one beating or one neighborhood," she stated firmly. "This is about who has the right to exist in our cities, about whose lives are considered disposable in the name of profit." Elijah delivered the closing statement, his voice stronger than it had been since the attack. "We are not asking for charity or special treatment. We are demanding justice. We are reclaiming our right to remain in the communities we built when no one else would invest in them." As the broadcast ended, the team's mood was cautiously triumphant. They had presented their case to the world. Now they waited for the response. It came more swiftly than anticipated. Within hours, the police department held an emergency press conference, declaring the footage potentially manipulated and suggesting that outside agitators were attempting to destabilize the city. They announced a temporary lockdown of the precinct headquarters for security purposes and attempted to interrupt power to strategic areas of the city where protests were forming. The chaos they created only amplified the story. Backup generators kept the stream's archive available, and the systematic power outages struck many observers as confirmation of the corruption alleged in the broadcast. By evening, police in riot gear had formed perimeters around City Hall and downtown buildings owned by Urban Vista-affiliated companies. But the protests that emerged were disciplined and peaceful, community members standing silently with signs bearing the names of those who had been pushed out of their homes or wrongfully arrested. "Where's Vance?" Cameron asked as they monitored the situation from Elijah's house, now guarded by volunteers from neighboring communities. "Gone," Scope reported through their secure channel. "Private jet departed 2 hours ago, registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands." Naomi frowned. "He's running." "No," Cameron corrected. "He's regrouping." Reports soon confirmed Cameron's assessment. News outlets carried the story that Colin Vance had departed on previously scheduled business, but would return to address these baseless accusations. Unnamed sources claimed Vance's jet was headed to a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. As night fell, the Cross family received unexpected support. 10 major city officials released a joint statement calling for an independent investigation into the allegations. The FBI announced they were reviewing the evidence. 3 officers from the precinct came forward anonymously, confirming parts of the story and offering additional documentation. The momentum seemed to be shifting, until Cameron disappeared. He had left to check on a community center that was serving as a gathering point for protesters. Naomi received a text, "All clear here," and then nothing. His phone went dark. Security cameras near his last known location showed a black SUV with tinted windows and no license plates. 4 hours passed without contact. Amira's monitoring system picked up increased police radio traffic using coded language. Scope's digital tracking showed Cameron's phone had been disabled, its last ping coming from an industrial area near the river. "They took him," Naomi said, her voice tight with fear and rage. "Vance's people." Elijah closed his eyes briefly, his lips moving in silent prayer. When he opened them, his resolve was clear. "Then we get him back." With Cameron missing, leadership fell to Naomi and Amira. They activated the network they'd built over the past weeks: community volunteers, sympathetic journalists, and even a few honest police officers who had reached their breaking point with corruption. Scope provided the breakthrough they needed. "I've accessed Urban Vista's security network. They're using a warehouse on River Street, one of their reclamation projects. Heat signatures show at least 6 people inside." Naomi knew they needed more than volunteers for this. She made one call to a former client who ran an independent security firm staffed by veterans. The man owed his freedom to Naomi's legal defense years earlier. Now he would repay that debt. While Naomi organized the rescue, Cameron sat in a bare room in the warehouse, zip-tied to a metal chair. 2 men with military bearing guarded him, while a third, clearly in charge, circled him slowly. "You understand the position you're in, Cross," the man said. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Mr. Vance is disappointed. He saw potential in you overseas, thought you had the stomach for necessary actions." Cameron remained silent, his training allowing him to maintain calm despite the bruise darkening along his jaw. "We need you to make a statement. Retract the allegations. Say it was edited, manipulated for revenge." The man leaned closer. "You do that, everyone walks away. Your father gets left alone. Your sister keeps her license. Life goes on." Cameron finally spoke, his voice level. "You think this ends with me? It could. You don't understand what you've started." Cameron's eyes were steady. "My father taught me patience, taught me that justice doesn't come from one man. It comes from truth that can't be buried." The interrogator straightened, nodding to one of the guards who stepped forward with a cattle prod. "Everyone breaks, Cross. It's just a matter of time and technique." Hours passed. Questions. Pain. More questions. But Cameron had endured worse during military training. He retreated into the mental discipline that had kept him alive in combat zones, present enough to respond when necessary, but detached from the pain. They had moved to more direct methods when the power in the warehouse suddenly cut out. Emergency lights cast red shadows across the concrete floor. One of the guards moved to the window, then stumbled back as a small object crashed through the glass, releasing smoke into the room. What followed was precise and professional, a coordinated entry through 2 access points. Cameron recognized the efficiency of special operations veterans and how the rescue team neutralized his captors with non-lethal force. Within minutes, he was being guided out of the building, zip ties cut, supported, between 2 operators in tactical gear. "Naomi sent us," one explained as they helped him into a waiting vehicle. "Your sister is one hell of a commander." Cameron managed a pained smile. "Runs in the family." By morning, footage of the rescue had leaked online, showing Cameron being led from the warehouse, visibly injured but walking. The company that owned the building denied any knowledge of what had happened there, but security footage showed the same unmarked vehicles that had been monitoring protests entering the property. Hours earlier, FBI agents raided Urban Vista's offices and City Hall simultaneously. Local news captured images of boxes of documents being removed, servers being confiscated, and several officials being escorted out in handcuffs. Among them was Officer Griggs, shouting obscenities at cameras as agents guided him into a federal vehicle. 2 days later, international authorities announced that Colin Vance had been detained in a small coastal town where he owned a private compound. Despite having landed in a country with no extradition treaty, pressure from multiple governments had resulted in his arrest on charges of financial crimes that transcended borders. Cameron watched the news from a hospital bed, ribs bandaged from his ordeal. Naomi sat beside him, while Elijah dozed in a chair nearby. The family reunited in circumstances none could have imagined. "It worked," Naomi said softly, not wanting to wake their father. "They're saying the investigation has expanded to 3 other cities with similar patterns, federal task forces, congressional inquiries. And our neighborhood?" The mayor announced an emergency order freezing all evictions and property sales in affected areas pending the investigation. Naomi squeezed his hand. "It's not over, but it's a start." Cameron nodded, watching their father sleep. He never lost faith. Not in the system. Not in people. He turned to his sister. "Not in me." "Neither did I," Naomi admitted. "I was just better at hiding it." 6 months later, the abandoned lot behind Elijah's church hummed with activity. What had once been a dumping ground for construction debris now featured fresh landscaping, newly poured concrete foundations, and the frame of a 2-story building rising from the earth. Cameron directed volunteers unloading lumber from a truck, his movements confident despite the occasional wince when he turned too quickly. Some injuries healed more slowly than others. "Looking good, Cross," called Aaron's mother as she arrived with a cooler of sandwiches and drinks for the workers. "Your daddy would be proud." Cameron nodded his thanks, glancing toward the church where Elijah met with community members in his office, back to his routine of counseling and organizing, though now with a cane always at his side. The transformation of the lot into the Elijah Cross Community Center had become a symbol of the neighborhood's rebirth. What Urban Vista had planned as luxury condominiums was becoming something more valuable, a place for counseling, food distribution, job training, and youth programs. Across town, Naomi stood before the judicial committee that had once threatened her license. Now they listened attentively as she declined their offer of a position on the city's newly formed Civil Oversight Committee. "I appreciate the opportunity," she told them, "but I've decided to run for district attorney instead." The announcement sent ripples through the local political establishment. Naomi Cross had become a household name since the exposure of the Urban Vista conspiracy. Her campaign announcement the following week drew supporters from every neighborhood in the city. "The justice system works only when it works for everyone," she told the crowd gathered at her campaign launch. "Not just those who can afford to buy influence or property." As Naomi built her campaign, Elijah returned to his first calling. On a bright Sunday morning, 3 months after being released from the hospital, he stood again behind the pulpit of his church. The building was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out onto the steps outside. Cameron sat in the back row, watching his father address the congregation with the same fire and compassion he remembered from childhood. The bruises had faded, but the experience had marked him in other ways. A slight hesitation in his step, a deliberate care in how he moved. Yet his voice remained strong, carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. The enemy thought bruises would stop me, Elijah proclaimed, his words drawing murmurs of agreement. But bruises are how God marks survivors. Amens rose from the crowd. "We are still here," he continued, "still standing, still speaking truth." After the service, as congregants lingered to speak with Elijah, Cameron slipped away. He drove to the small cemetery on the edge of town where his mother had been buried 8 years earlier. The grave was well maintained. Elijah had seen to that even in Cameron's absence. Fresh flowers indicated his father's recent visit. Cameron placed his own bouquet beside them, then sat on the stone bench facing the headstone. From his pocket, he withdrew the stack of letters he'd carried with him for so long, each one still sealed, preserved in their envelopes. One by one he opened them, reading his father's words chronicling years of family events, community changes, and unwavering hope for his son's return. The final letter, written just weeks before Elijah's attack, struck deepest. "My son. The city changes around us, but some things remain constant. This morning I walked past your old school, now they call it a boutique office space, and remembered how you would wait by the oak tree for me each afternoon. Some days I walk by that spot and almost expect to see you there, backpack slung, over one shoulder ready to tell me about your day. I had a dream last night that you came home, not running from something but moving toward something. Perhaps it was just an old man's wishful thinking, but it felt real enough to mention here. Your room remains as you left it. Your mother would say I'm being foolish, but I believe in preparing. A place for those we love, even when they're not ready to occupy it. Until you're ready, Dad, as Cameron folded the letter. Tears fell freely for the first time since his return. I'm home now, he whispered. Over the next several months, the neighborhood began a subtle transformation, not the wholesale gentrification Urban Vista had planned, but an authentic revitalization driven by residents themselves. Abandoned buildings reopened as local businesses. Graffiti evolved into commissioned murals celebrating community history. Empty lots became gardens and playgrounds. Amira launched a podcast called Streetlight Witness, documenting stories of both corruption and resilience. Her first episode, featuring Elijah's story, was downloaded over 1 million times and picked up by national radio programs. The legal consequences of the Urban Vista exposure reached far beyond the city. Congressional hearings examined the intersection of police power and development interests in urban renewal projects nationwide. 3 other cities launched investigations into similar patterns within their boundaries. New legislation was proposed to prevent the tactics that had been used to displace residents. On a warm afternoon 9 months after their family had been reunited by crisis, Cameron sat on the steps of the church watching children play basketball on the newly installed court beside the community center. Elijah emerged from the building, walking carefully with his cane, and lowered himself to sit beside his son. Marcus came by today, Elijah said, referring to the teenager he had protected that fateful night. He's working at the center now, wants to start a mentoring program for younger kids. Cameron nodded, watching the teenagers on the court. Continuing what you started. What we're all continuing, Elijah corrected gently. That boy told me something I wanted to share with you. He said, Mr. Cross, you didn't just save me. You gave me something to believe in. The words hung in the air between them, a testament to the power of standing firm when it would have been easier to step aside. Naomi joined them a few minutes later, campaign materials tucked under her arm. Amira arrived shortly after, recording equipment in hand for her latest podcast episode. The 4 sat together as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the community that had nearly been erased. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't come back, Naomi said to Cameron. Someone else would have stood up, he replied. The truth doesn't depend on any one of us. Elijah smiled at his children, pride evident in his eyes. He looked out at the neighborhood, at families walking together, at storefronts being repainted, at garden plots taking root in once vacant lots. Justice isn't loud, he said softly. Sometimes it's just knowing we're still standing. As darkness fell, lights came on throughout the neighborhood. Warm glows from windows where families gathered, streetlights illuminating sidewalks where neighbors greeted each other, and the bright beacon of the community center where a new generation was finding its voice. The system that had once seemed invincible had not been completely dismantled. Such changes never happened all at once. But its machinery had been exposed, its power diminished by nothing more complicated than truth, spoken without fear. And in that simple victory was the seed of all others to come. What price would you pay to protect your home, your family, your truth? If Elijah's story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful narratives, and share this video to ensure voices like his are never silenced.